Welcome to Mornings with Patricia. Happy Thursday. Today I want to talk about time and the concept of time. And I'm going to be reading from The Joy of Living, Unlocking the Secret and Science of Happiness by Yogi Mingyur Rinpoche. And I had used this book many years ago when I gave some of my sermons, and he's called the happiest man in the world. So I love this book, and if you get a chance, I always say, hey, you should, try to read this book or that book. It's a fantastic read. I'm just looking at my time here to make sure my counter is working. Okay, so, I think the human race, we've lost our ballet with time. We've lost our celebration. I think before the clock was invented, and I think that was a Chinese invention, and Chinese are so amazing. They invented so many things. Before that, people worked with the seasons, and they worked with the rising and the setting of the sun, and the moon shifts, and so there was this harmony and there was this dance. And now we're constantly looking at the clock. We're constantly worrying about time, how slow it's going, how quick it's going, how young we are, how old we are. It's craziness, and it's all in the mind. It's all in the mind. From a Buddhist perspective, because Yogi is a Buddhist, from a Buddhist perspective, there is an instant and an eon and an instant. And the more you break down time into smaller and smaller units, the more you lose the concept of how expansive everything is, and how microscopic everything is. So I'm going to read to you a story from his book. Let's see. So he's talking about the Buddha, and he said the Buddha illustrated this point, and the point was that the relationship between the two periods, the eon or the single instant of time, would not make the instant any longer or the eon any shorter. So he illustrated this point through a story about a young man who came to a great master in search of a profound teaching. The master agreed, but suggested the young man first have a cup of tea. And, quote, after that, he said, I'll give you the profound teaching you've come looking for. So the master poured a cup of tea, and as the student brought it to his mouth, the cup of tea transformed itself into a broad lake surrounded by mountains. As he stood beside the lake, admiring the beauty of the scene, a girl stepped from behind him and approached the lake to gather water in a pail. For the young man, it was love at first sight, and as the girl looked at the young man standing beside the lake, she fell in love with him too. The young man followed her back to her home, where she lived with her aged parents. Gradually, the girl's parents grew to be fond of the young man, and he of them, and it was eventually agreed that the two young people should marry. After 3 years, the couple's first child was born, a son. A few years later, a daughter was born. The children grew up happy and strong until one day, at the age of 14, the son fell ill. None of the medicines prescribed for him cured his illness. Within a year, he was dead. Not long afterwards, the couple's young daughter went to gather wood in the forest, and while she was busy with her task, she was attacked and killed by a tiger. Unable to overcome her sorrow over losing both her children, the young man's wife eventually decided to drown herself in the nearby lake. Distraught over the loss of their daughter and their grandchildren, the girl's parents stopped eating, eventually starving themselves to death. Having lost his wife, his children, and his parents-in-law, the young man began to think that he might as well die himself. He walked to the edge of the lake, determined to drown himself. Just as he was about to jump into the water, however, he suddenly found himself back in the master's house, holding his cup of tea up to his lips. Though he had lived an entire lifetime, hardly an instant had passed. The cup was still warm in his hands, and the tea was still hot. He looked across the table at the teacher, who nodded, saying, "Now you see. all phenomena proceed from the mind, which is emptiness. They do not truly exist except in the mind, but they are not nothingness. There is your profound teaching. So let me just read a little bit further. From a Buddhist perspective, the essence of time, like the essence of space and the objects that move around in space, is emptiness. At a certain point, any attempt to examine time or space in terms of smaller and smaller intervals finally break down. You can experiment with your perception of time through meditation, trying to look at time in smaller and smaller increments. You can try to examine time in this way until finally you reach a point where you can't name or define anything anymore. When you reach that point, you enter an experience that is beyond words, beyond ideas, beyond concepts. So what is Jungi really trying to say here? What is the Buddha teaching us by this story, right? So, I've talked to you before about the Hindu tale of the king that dreamt he was a peasant, then he woke up in his court and realized he was a king. And all of these teachings show us that that's Romeo. By the way, Romeo went to the vet today and he proceeded to bark at all the dogs in his Romeo way. And the doctor was very excited and could not believe his recovery. And although we were doing laser with him and medication, he didn't expect for that kind of recovery. And I told him we had been doing healing and Reiki, and he was so supportive of it. And I think about, just a few years ago when it was, Reiki wasn't really accepted, and now our local hospital has a Reiki team. So life, it's so wonderful how progressive we become and how open, isn't it? So what they're trying to say from this Buddhist perspective, about time, so did the guy really have that experience about his wife and his children and his parents-in-laws? And the question becomes, is he having the experience with the master, right? It depends on what we choose to believe in the mind. And it's the same thing about time. If you think that time is passing, you think you're getting older or you're too young to do anything, those sorts of things, that's all in the mind. And it's become, a point of perception. And when we believe in our perception, right, like the young man, he's in distress. He's lost everything and he's about ready to kill himself. Also the same young man in the master's cabin and looking for answers, right? Drinking his tea. Everything is simultaneous, and there's this emptiness, it's not nothingness, it's emptiness. And for me, emptiness means potential, the potential to create, the potential to experience. But again, if you think about, even about Romeo, right? So many of you, you all so beautiful and supportive, and you sit in your love and your healing, and you could, be sad for us or support us or whatever, but, Romeo is not your dog, so your perception is going to be different. Where our perception was, okay, he is our family, and so we're having this direct experience. So, it lives out there. I shared it. But the perception is different, right? Based on, how we perceive, based on our relationships with all these sorts of things, and our relationship of time. How do we know that time is passing? Well, we see the sun come up, we see it go down, we see the seasons. We see those sorts of things. If we were, let's say, peasants in the Middle Ages, and we weren't privy to books or those sorts of things, and we were in our homes in the fields, we probably wouldn't know much about any history, right? We might know a little bit about local history, the legends of our own area, but again, time would be really relative. Right? Lifespans were seemingly shorter. So this whole thing about time, and I think we get so fixated on it. It's amazing how we limit ourselves. So you go to bed at night and you wake up in the morning. I think at every moment it's just the potential, just to be in that moment. And that moment can seem like an eon, or it can seem like a second. Uh, it's about your perception, everything that's going on in that moment. So I did a meditation last night at Sacred Space, and they took everyone to heaven. And I had told them at the beginning that the induction was going to be a very strict deepening induction. So they would go down very, very deep, which is something I don't normally take them down that deep. And then we spent some time in heaven. And pretty much everybody said, "Oh my goodness, that was the shortest meditation you've ever done. Wow, what was that? Like, 5 minutes?" And I said, "Yeah, well, no, you've actually been down 35, 40 minutes." And they're like, "What?" And, and that happens when when you do a deepening induction like that, because it takes you down, and your consciousness just, and you lose all concept of time. Even though you might hear things going on around you, that can seem very discombobulated as well. So, I guess what I wanted to share with you today for your takeaway today is, as you go through your day, noticing the moments, not looking at the clock, not worrying about the time. Are you going to be early? You're going to be late? You're always going to be where you need to be, right when you need to be there, if you put that in your mind. Right? You won't be late if you put that in your mind. And you won't be too early if you put that in your mind. You'll be always right where you need to be, when you need to be there, doing exactly what you want to be doing. And if you're not doing things that you want to be doing, I would ask you, why? If you feel that your time on earth has a limitation, why would you sell any of your time away for anything? Do what you love to do, and do what makes you happy, and immerse yourself, not in time, but in the experience. So, thank you for joining me. And 1, 2, 3. Oh my God, I love myself. And I love you too. And this is a shout out to Mary Pat. I hope I'm saying that right. Hope you're enjoying your time in Canada. And thank you for finding me on Facebook and YouTube. Wow, maybe someday we'll get to meet. Okay, and just a reminder to everyone, if you would like to share this video, that's always so helpful. I'd love to see it go around the world. All right, I love you, and have a blessed, blessed Thursday. I'll see you tomorrow.